Thank you all for being here with us. Sure appreciate it. Let's start off with the main theme of the conference. If I start with you, if I may, Mr. Immelt, which is, how is innovation important to your company, and how do you make sure you always keep it going?
Well, you know, it's when you're a company was founded by Thomas Edison, you know, innovation is kind of in the beginning of the company. And I would say that over more than 100 years, we take a lot of time on it. We spend a lot of money on R&D. We do basic research. We do it globally. We've got more than 40,000 engineers and PhDs in the company. We stay close to our markets. But I would say, Walter, it's about funding. It's about passion for what we do. It's about valuing scientists and technologists. And it's about really trying to solve big problems like clean energy and healthcare and things like that.
Well, yeah, you made a big push, clean energy and healthcare. How do you keep a company so large, a conglomerate, so widespread from being lethargic?
Look, I think it's always been a part of the culture to be externally focused. We benchmark and study every company in the world, small and large. We try to understand how Paul and his team work. We understand China South Railway, Railway and China, French companies, Russian companies. So we keep an external focus. I would say beyond that, we also try to understand entrepreneurs. You know, we have big investment portfolios that we take in startup companies. That keeps us, I'd say, more innovative and more spry. And I'd say the last thing is just, if it's in energy, we want to do it. Mm-hmm. You know, in other words, we try to take these big vertical domain markets and really, through the cycles, keep investing. And we want to be the go-to solutions provider to our customers in these big spaces.
Mr. Otellini, besides innovation being key to your company, innovation in the world is key to your company's success. How do you keep driving that?
Well, you know, last night people were talking about Moore's Law. And it's interesting, Moore's Law is not a law of physics. It's a law that reflects human inventiveness. Mm-hmm. And so from our perspective, you have to continue to reinvent that future. You have to be able to drive circuits smaller, circuits faster, and so forth. Externally, big companies miss big changes sometimes. I think Intel was slow to grab the internet. We came around and got in front of that at one point. But sometimes some of these changes happen outside your company, and you have to be able to recognize them. So what we did after that is we put in place a very large-scale venture investment group. We're probably the largest corporate venture investor in the world. And they make these seed investments globally into companies so that we have eyes and ears on the future trends that we may not be inventing, but we can grab and be able to exploit.
I was just going to follow up on what Paul said. I would say when you're a company the size of GE and Intel, one way to grow is to tell everybody, okay, just do better tomorrow than you did yesterday. That doesn't work. We got to pick what's next and upscale. And I would say there's two things that are predominant in the world GE lives in. One is the emerging market consumer, right? So if you've had the thesis that the American consumer was the engine of growth for the last 25 years, one thing's for sure is that this billion-person emerging market consumer is going to be the engine of growth for the next 20 or 25 years. The other one is solving big problems, clean energy, affordable healthcare, things like that. Now, I think the way we've tried to evolve, I went to work for GE in 1982. My career was a linear career. I learned how to sell individual products to individual markets, and therefore we grew. You've got to train a next generation of systems thinkers. You got to train people that are comfortable in technology, public policy, innovation, entrepreneurs, global systems change. And I think, we had educators out here earlier. I think teaching people to be clean energy, affordable healthcare, these are systems problems. Mm-hmm. Technology plays a role, public policy plays a role, big companies play a part, small companies play a part. All those things have to come together. So I'd say emerging market consumer, solving problems. Mm-hmm. These are the two pillars of how companies like ours have to innovate.
And you mentioned healthcare as being another such pillar. You all did a joint collaborative R&D investment. Explain what it was and why.
I'll start. It's ongoing. We're rolling out our first products now. First products are for the home. It's for chronic disease patients to be able to do monitoring of remote monitoring of their conditions, be able to have teleconferencing with their caregivers and so forth. The idea is keep people home longer, keep them happier, and keep them healthier, and do it in a proactive, cost-effective fashion. And that's the premise around a lot of the work that we're doing. The second product was a reading machine for the blind and dyslexic that we're now rolling out that has a similar kind of characteristic. It uses technology to solve a problem, and it was defined by the users. And GE's got a lot of work going on in remote sensing to understand, did mom get out of bed today? Did she did she get her newspaper off the front door without being intrusive? You can use technology to follow patterns and help make sure that as a son, I know mom's okay without having to call her up every hour and say, is everything all right? All these technologies are, I think, coming to price points now that are just going to be revolutionary at a time when we need to drive costs out of the healthcare system in order to drive quality up.
But real quickly, why did you choose to do a joint investment with GE as opposed to just doing the R&D?
So a year ago, I read an article in the Journal that Paul had done an investor meeting and said that they were interested in healthcare. I've always been a fan of Intel and of Paul, and picked up the phone and said, I've got half of an idea. Why don't we work together, on this? And so we've kind of put it together. I think, home health is going to, almost 70% of the healthcare dollars in the United States are on chronic disease. Chronic disease can't be treated in the hospital. It's got to be treated remotely. So that says you're going to have to combine, we've been in the healthcare business since 1915. You've got to combine really information technology with domain expertise. We bring the domain. Intel brings the, a lot of the, together we think we can grow faster than separately. And I view this as, this will be GE's entree in the home, will be the joint venture with Intel. Beyond that, I ran our healthcare business for 5 years. We've been around the industry for a long time. We're a big employer. Somehow Moore's Law has to be brought to healthcare. Somebody someday is going to figure out how to bring the systems of technology to healthcare. And my view is, who better than Intel? We're going to launch with 2 or 3 products, but I'd be disappointed if 5 years from now we didn't really, kind of have a huge footprint in that space. And I think in healthcare, it's going to be the merger between domain players like a GE or other, pharma companies, and this incredible innovation of the information technology industry have to come together in healthcare. And that's still nascent, Walter.
You just said something really fascinating, because if you look at the history, for the past 40 years, innovation has had as its main dynamo the microchip, which Intel pioneered. And that innovation has come in the information technology industry. You're saying, and it does make sense, that we now have to apply that so it goes into other industries like healthcare, because information technology, just driving information technology, can only get us so far.
It has. I mean, at their essence, computers are tools of productivity, right? That's what they do. And the healthcare sector globally, and certainly in the US, is the least penetrated sector of any industry in terms of information technology as a percent of the spending. And you can see it in the outcomes. You can see it in the cost, you can see it in the error rates, you can see it in the confusion, the fact that you have to fill out forms at the doctor's office every time you go. It's crazy.
Why don't we have why can't I get electronic medical records?
Somebody has to say we're going to have a standard. And the standard is going to be X. I
was just going to say.
Right now you've got competing standards. Actually, my advocacy is that the Veterans Affairs has something like 5 million people on a standard system now. Let's use it. It may not be perfect. Let's use it. Let's get the thing going and make that the national system, and we'll evolve it as we go along. But you need to start somewhere.
I joined our healthcare business in 1996, and I've had 1,000 conversations with Mike, Steve Ballmer, who's a buddy, and Paul, and everybody. And if you grew up in Silicon Valley, the first thing you say is, okay, where are the standards, right? I've hung out in healthcare and say, maybe if there's common standards by the time I die, that would be progress. I'm hoping to live, a nice full life, but it's hard. And I think, at GE, we hang around these industries for a long time. I think the catalyst of a company like Intel and GE is the nuance of healthcare with the really the Moore's Law aspect of information. Ultimately, that's gonna, I think, come together in a way that, that's how, we're going to do healthcare reform in some way, shape, or form, and then we're going to wake up the next day, and costs probably aren't going to be coming down. You know, because
and you're
unless
talking about the current formulation
the current
of the
formulation,
bill.
really, I mean,
so it's not going to drive innovation?
It's access, it's going to change insurance and things like that. But ultimately, we've got to make sure that we've got the right collaborations that are going to drive the right type of innovation to take costs down.
What could government be doing if you could write that bill from scratch to encourage innovation?
Well, mandate electronic medical records quickly, have a output-based payment system.
Instead of fee-for-service, say,
yeah.
show me the data.
Allow telemedicine so doctors can work across state lines. And so the most efficient way to handle this is remotely. I mean, why does your radiologist have to be right next to you? Mm-hmm. You're looking on one of his systems anyway. You can put that on the internet and look at the screen anywhere. Mm-hmm. So let's just figure out how to do this the way that other businesses have done, you know, supply line management and supply chain.
To technology, I'd pick the 25 biggest cities in the U.S. I'd pick the biggest employers in those cities, big and small businesses. I would set up federal grants, don't have to be big, could be 25, 40, 50 million bucks, and say collectively in this town, we're going to take the companies coming together to change the shape of the cost curve. You know, that we have the most at stake. I mean, we spend almost $3 billion on employee and retiree health care. We do it in Cincinnati, Ohio, Louisville, Kentucky, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Atlanta, Georgia. That's the healthcare system. So if you can go into an individual town, collectively work on really changing the way workflow takes place, the information technology, things like that. So I would say we can do it from a technology standpoint. We can also do it from a business practice standpoint for the people that are really going to be out spending the money in healthcare, which are big companies.
You know, Larry Summers last night made a little bit of news by playing on the couplet of Ask Not that President Kennedy said, and said, people should be coming here to innovation conferences, big companies, and saying, not here's what government should do for us, but here's something we could try. Could you do what you just said in cooperation with Mr. Otellini and Intel and try it as a pilot program somewhere, and what would you need the government to do to incent that?
I would say we can and we will. Mm-hmm. You know, in other words, I would, you know, Paul told me what Larry said, and I guess he's right in a matter of degree. You know, I would say it is possible to run a big multinational company and also be a good citizen at the same time. Those aren't mutually exclusive. I think those are the types of things we should be doing and will do, and GE will do. We're gonna pick a city that's a big GE town. We're gonna work, we're gonna be an aggregator of the people in that city, the businesses in that city, because Medicare and Medicaid, that has its own. And we're gonna collectively try to, you know, use Lean Six Sigma, information technology, all the tools we know to change the shape of the cost curve. Now, what's the inverse of that, right? And again, I'm not here to be critical, but if somebody says they're going to cut Medicare reimbursements, Intel's and GE's healthcare costs in that town just went up.
Correct.
Cost shifting is real, and it happens. So every time, you know, basically the way it goes is that half the patients are Medicare, and the government pays 80% of that cost. The other half is private pay. We pay 120% of that cost. All these people go to the same hospital. There's not a door that says, I work for GE, I go in this door, and a door that says, I'm a Medicare patient, I go in this door. You go to the hospital. You all get treated. Mm-hmm. So unless collectively, business and government work on the total cost of the system, this is never going to. Now, you know, one way you can do it is in the provider base. The other way you do it is better information, better prevention, more wellness, less diabetes, make people so they're not overweight, you know, things like that. But that is a systems problem that has to be solved.
Mm-hmm. We talked about healthcare. What other sectors could be driven by technological innovation being applied? There's energy, there's life sciences.
Education.
Which one would you think some other ripe fruit for the picking?
Well, I mean, Jeff knows more about the energy than I ever will, but I think so much of the electrical grid that we generate, the electricity that we generate, gets lost. Mm-hmm. I mean, something like 60% gets lost in the inefficiencies of the transmission and the inefficiencies of the light bulbs at the end of the chain. So we can fix that. You can re-engineer the grid. You can put smart meters in. You can put storage capacity in for renewable energy that doesn't exist today. Those kinds of things that have to get done. On the education side, I think the stuff that Joel and John Hennessy were talking about this morning is the right approach. Let's, we're still, as you pointed out, teaching class the same way we did certainly when I went to school and probably when my father went to school.
When Ben Franklin went to school, we were teaching it this
Maybe
way.
the same books.
Yeah, right.
And yet you saw the video of the classroom in Africa,
Right.
where they're using these little low-cost laptops, accessing the internet, tailoring and individualizing the education to the kids' specific needs. I think the school of one idea that Joel talked about was exactly the right thing. Let's tailor the education to the kid as opposed to have the kid be one of 15, 20, 50 kids in a classroom.
If you were to drill into any industry now for innovation, would it be energy, education, health, life
Water,
science?
I have to go with energy just because, GE's been in the energy business for more than 100 years, in the healthcare business, let's say for 80, 190 years, something like that. I went to work at GE in 1982. In the years I've been with GE, we're probably in our 10th generation of new healthcare technology, right? I mean, in other words, the industry is such that it insists on that kind of change. Energy, we still sell some of the same products we sold 30 years ago because oil prices have been too low. The requirements haven't been that robust. Global growth has been moderate. All that's going to change.
Is it going to change in a high-tech way, or is it going to change by just simple?
Look, I think it's a lot of it's going to be driven outside the United States by more demand. Personally, we've always been a fan of really trying to solve the global warming issue. So it may be driven by legislation of some kind, whether it's an EPA rulemaking or things like that. And I think it's going to be new technologies, whether it's renewables or nuclear or things like that, hitting lower cost points that are driven by how do you apply it in China, how do you apply it in India, how do you do it in Turkey. But the energy industry in some way is going to be completely reshaped over the next 20 years.
Do you
I think automotive is the other big one that's ripe for, or transportation to take it to a higher level, ripe for change. I visited this company in China last month, BYD, biggest company you never heard of. It's called Build Your Dream. These guys are the world's largest manufacturer of batteries for laptops and cell phones. They're also now building, their goal is $20,000 electric cars for China. And they're in production now. Warren Buffett's an investor. These guys have a view that they can re-engineer automobiles. We talked a little bit last night about using the sensors and the compute power that's in cars now to make them safer. Why can't the car sense that it's going on the wrong way on an on-ramp and stop for you if the driver's not alert? I mean, this is cheap stuff, and it's so pervasive that if we just turn the problem around and apply this sort of semi-infinite computing capability at low costs into some of the day-to-day problems, you stop killing people on roads overnight.
Shifting topics, explain to me the thinking and strategy on the NBC Universal sale possibility. I know you can't do the details.
Took you 20 minutes. Yeah. I can't talk.
I know you can't talk about the deal, but what, as you run a conglomerate, how do you think about, okay, this is what I'm going to do with a part?
I just think you always have to be thinking about what's next. In every industry you're in, stay strategically agile, and I'll leave it at that.
What's next? But I mean, you focus on a core competence, and you figure that's not in it? Is that part of the
again, we've been in the media business. I like my team, and I'm quite comfortable with it. But I think complacency equals arrogance in a company setting. And so I've never wanted to be complacent about how we think about GE. And I'm not going to be that way today.